This program has been approved for one IDCEC CEU. To receive credit for this program, please submit your full name, IDCEC number, program class code, and your summary essay to ceu@iida.org. The program class code is located alongside the title of this program on the IIDA Academy page. For a certificate of completion to use toward another certifying body, please submit the same information to ceu@iida.org. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the very first episode of Season 6 of Collective Design. This season, we will be exploring the many how-tos that designers experience in the industry, and today we'll be exploring how to design sustainably now. As a reminder, this program is approved for one IDCEC CEU. To receive IDCEC credit, you must download and use the IDCEC mobile app available on the App Store for Apple or Google Play for Android. You will need your IDCEC number and password to log in. At the end of the program, open the app, log in, and scan the on-screen QR code. With any questions, please contact ceu@iida.org. Now, without further ado, I'll pass it over to our moderator today, David Bergman.
Here we go. Started trying to turn on the video. Hi, everybody. Thank you, James. I'm going to first just introduce myself briefly and then turn it over to each of our participants or panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll launch into the topic. So I'm here, I guess, primarily as the program director for the New York School of Interior Design's Master of Professional Studies in Sustainable Interior Environments, which we were discussing this before we started here. As far as we all know, is the only program of its kind that is specifically dedicated to sustainable interior design. I also teach elsewhere. I've been teaching at Parsons, various departments in sustainability for many, many years. And I am a practicing designer with a small firm here where I try to walk some of the talk at least. And I'm an author, wrote a bunch of years ago a book with a very uninventive title of Sustainable Design, subtitle A Critical Guide. And I also, when I have time, write a blog called Eco-Optimism, which is sort of a self-explanatory title that believes that our solutions lie in the confluence of putting together economic theories and design, and the fact that we can all come out ahead of the game when we put this together correctly. So with that, I'd like to turn it over, and I'm just going to go in the order of the images on the screen here. And Melissa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Hello, everyone. My name is Melissa Kelly. I'm a sustainability director at Gensler here in New York. I'm part of our climate action practice area, which is a group of people who are dedicated specifically to decarbonization and sustainable design across all of our projects. So I'm doing a lot of crazy and fun stuff, but my specialty is in performance analytics. So looking at daylight and energy and operational and embodied carbon and all of that kind of fun stuff. I also support some of our firm-wide sustainability research and initiatives like the Gensler Product Sustainability Standards, or GPS. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Saty?
Yeah, hi everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Saty Sharma. I'm professor in design for sustainability at Savannah College of Art and Design. I teach in the graduate program, which is called Design for Sustainability program. It's a unique program that brings design and sustainability together, two disciplines together, and teaches how design can contribute to sustainability in many ways. And I also practice as an industrial designer. That's my background. I designed various consumer durables for brands like Philips, Electrolux. I designed medical devices and consumer appliances and all those. And I'm also interested in behavior change, design for behavior change, how designers can use behavior change techniques or design-driven techniques to change or to foster sustainable behavior. And that's where I pursued my PhD. And I'm excited to be here, part of collective design. Thank you.
Terrific, thanks. Joey.
Hey, thanks, David. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm really thrilled to be here. My name is Joey Shea. I'm the manager of North American Sustainability here at Interface Flooring Company. I like to describe my job as I'm a climate movement builder who happens to work for a flooring company. I'm really passionate about the purpose and the mission of the company and the impact that we've had in trying to demonstrate that there is a for-profit, more sustainable path forward for business. And I love talking about the climate impact of our industry, of the specification process, of supply chains, and thrilled to be able to represent the manufacturer voice here with this really wonderful panel. I think y'all are in for a treat, and I'm going to try to stay mostly out of the way.
Oh, don't do that. All right, and Jessica. I'm sorry, Allison.
Yeah, well, thank you, David. Yeah, so I am Allison Smith. I'm a sustainable design leader and vice president at HKS, based out of our Dallas office. And I have a particular focus on advancing sustainable materials and well-being design within our practice. But I like to describe myself as a free agent. So I work with many different practice sectors, many different offices, and help to support sustainability kind of throughout. I'm excited to be a part of this conversation today.
Terrific. Thanks, everyone. I agree with Joey. I think it's going to be a great conversation. And when I was first asked to participate in this, my thinking was, this is terrific. This is such a perfect time for us to have this conversation about, what's next, what we should be doing now. And many of you may be aware of this confluence of events in the industry, or maybe not. But I see this as a time when two things are coming together very, very significantly. One is, and this is just background to set this in, one is the realization that we've seen just in the past few years of just how important interiors are in looking at the impacts, the overall impacts of the built environment in terms of climate change and resources and everything else that's a part of that. And for years, it's really been the architectural world that's taken the lead in this, kind of understandably, because a lot of the issue had to do with operational energy, and that had to do in large part with cores and shells of buildings and mechanical systems and things like that. But just recently, through number crunching that various people have done, has been the realization that because of the nature of interiors, the impact of the materials churn is very, very significant. And by materials churn, what I'm talking about is the fact that interiors tend to have surprisingly short shelf lives. And some of these studies have shown that, especially commercial and hospitality interiors, they could turn over every 5 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. And what that means environmentally is that while a building may stand for 50 or 100 or more years, it could see 10 renovations in that period, or perhaps even more. And that's a whole lot of material churn going in and out and back in and out, materials being produced, installed, removed, going we don't know where often, and more materials being brought in to replace those. And when we add up that mass of materials, it actually comes to, I don't know if I could say it in terms of pounds or anything, but at least as significant as the materials and the operating energy of overall buildings. So that's gone to put a renewed, very much needed emphasis in the interior design world on our impact on the environment and on climate change. And concurrent with that, the other piece of this that I hope we're going to emphasize a bit as we talk today is a relatively new term for many of us, which is circularity, or coming from the phrase circular economy. And those of us who have been involved in sustainability, or dipping our toes in it even, we've become accustomed to a lot of terms, and we've used sustainability and sustainable design became the norm for the past 2 decades or so, amidst other phrases that we've used, starting from green design and moving on and cradle to cradle. And this idea of circularity really pulls all of that together. And just to attempt to give it an altogether too brief definition, the gist of circularity is the idea that we make no waste. It's not less waste in its idealized form. It's no waste, that everything that goes into a building or whatever type of design we're talking about, but we're talking about interiors here, everything that goes in does not end up in a landfill or an incinerator, but stays in either a loop of usage in the form that it's in, or being remanufactured into something else, or recycled, or going back into the earth. And that's a fundamental change for many of us in how we think of design. The way most of us learned it or practiced it, we do our wonderful designs and they hopefully get built and people are happy, and then we're sort of done, right? That's the end of the project. Whereas in a circularity system, it really can't be. For one thing, we have to design with that end in mind. We have to enable the materials and the products to stay out of landfills. And that requires us to think not only about the materials we're using, but how we design with them, how we put them together, how we enable things to be disassembled and deconstructed later on. And it also, that's one mindset, I think, in the interior design world that we need to talk about. And the other one, the parallel side of that, or I guess the looped side of that, is us as interior designers learning to think in terms of reusing and reapplying some of those materials that have been through loops already. Whether it is a reupholstered sofa or a recycled metal in whatever form, but to avoid the stigma of used things and to actually make it part of our vocabulary. And I was on a panel recently that was actually, I think it was IIDA New York, in which somebody had the phrase, make second life a first choice, which I thought summed things up particularly well. So with that intro, I want to bring everybody else in so I talk a little bit less. And so at this, what I could call an inflection point, is a realization that we have a larger responsibility than we had first thought. And I want to ask all of you how you have seen, or have you seen, the concept of circularity coming into play? Have people been talking about it? And more importantly, have you seen progress in embracing this idea in the industry? And by the way, when we talked about the questions earlier, I started to ask who was interested in which questions, and everybody was interested in all the questions. So I'm just going to ask who feels like jumping in first. Maybe I do need to pick.
I can speak to this a little bit.
Great.
I think, I was reflecting on, as you were describing this, turning point, that I think the same thing was happening with embodied carbon over the past couple of years, where there was something that was an idea that wasn't really understood. It was a little bit of a stretch goal for a lot of people. It started to gain momentum. It started to gain a lot of industry awareness, and then it's suddenly become mainstream, and it's something that is really achievable for a lot of people. And I think I see circularity getting to that level. And I think that is going to accelerate, and I can't wait for it. I think it's going to be wonderful. And I think there's a lot of challenges that we're going to need to have to address. And one of the biggest challenges is that every project is in a different situation in terms of what resources can they do, what's available to them, how does the timing work out, what are their connections and opportunities, what kind of reuse makes the most sense for them. But I think that one of the things that, designers have this really powerful ability for is to bring a creative lens to that and start to think about possibilities as early as possible and talk to your clients about them, talk to your colleagues about them, just be excited about it all the time. I think if that starts to happen, a lot of other things will fall into place.
Great.
Maybe I can chime in. So I think especially in interiors, there's a lot of opportunity to think about circularity with the spaces potentially being fit out for such a short period of time. And, thinking about like what will happen at the end of life of this particular space or the materials in the space. Can they be disassembled in some way, or can the same tenant or maybe a future tenant use, kind of be able to modify the space to be able to use going forward? Over the last few years, we've worked on a few projects and that have had these types of discussions, right? And right now I'm working on a project where the client has been in their space for a number of years and are wanting to rework that space to make it function a little bit better for them, but they also want to kind of keep and reuse as much as possible. And this is coming from a sustainability perspective, but probably also, cost is important to every client. And there's a lot of other benefits, I think, coming alongside having these types of conversations with clients and thinking of design from that perspective. So we've been talking through like, what can we reuse? What do we need to replace? And how we can just make the space better for the occupants within the space.
Mm-hmm. Great. I can add to it, and I think one thing that I'm seeing here is from industry perspective is that there is awareness that's increasing in the industry, also among designers and architects towards circular economy, everyone, all design fields, and towards minimizing waste, towards minimizing carbon emissions. And so that's there. And I'm also seeing from the positive side that there is growing availability of more sustainable choices, materials, reclaimed materials, eco-friendly choices, bioplastics, biopolymers, many other options. So those are becoming more available. So with the system, so those are good positive signs. And secondhand buying and reusing refurbished materials and products, components that's in the interior decor, I think that also is increasing. However, there are still challenges in adopting circular systems. We still need more awareness and education among clients, manufacturers, designers, everyone. And sometimes it's the cost aspect that's there. Sometimes those options are more expensive and are not easily available. So those are kind of challenges when it comes to scalability aspect. And so limited availability of resources that is there. And another challenge could be sometime because of this cost, another challenge could be client is looking for return for investment in there. So these are some of the challenges, but I think if we work with suppliers, find suppliers who are committed towards sustainability and establishing, if we can establish long-term relationship with them and set clear expectations, I think those things could advance it further.
A couple of you have mentioned cost, and I do want to come back to that, but I want to stick first on the general topic of how interior designers are thinking about sustainability at the moment. And Saty, you brought up, I think it was you brought up, no, I'm misremembering something. No, Melissa brought up the topic of embodied carbon. And that too is a relatively new term. And in fact, some of us use a different term called upfront carbon to refer to the carbon expended, the energy expended in making things. Is that becoming a known term in the industry among the people you talk to? Do interior designers grasp the concept, and are they able to select products and materials based on that? What's been your observation experience?
Yeah, I think, actually, it's been surprisingly intuitive for a lot of people. And I think there's that correlation between economic cost and carbon cost that makes it a really tangible element. And I think that one of the things that's been also really exciting is the advances in data availability in the past couple of years in the industry have been tremendous and a huge support for making decisions. So it used to be that you had to be a really, very detailed, very specific type of person, talking about myself, who will read through a 20-page EPD, find exactly the table, knows all the acronyms, knows the numbers. Like, no one has time for that. And now it's on people's cut sheets. And now we can just ask when we're shopping around for materials. We have targets in mind. We have comparative analysis, and it's all really incredible. So I think that that's something that has become really mainstream. Also, our clients are talking about it as well and asking about it, and something that they want to celebrate on their projects too. So I think if we can get circularity to be that exciting, it's going to be amazing for us.
Making it exciting is an important point, I think. It's not something we just have to add on to our tasks, but getting people really involved in it. From the manufacturer side, I mean, Joey, you get a sort of a self-selected type of customer at interface, where they're probably often coming to interface because they're interested in sustainability. But have you noticed whether the people you talk to, and I'm thinking especially the interior designers, are inquiring more about sustainable information on the products?
For sure. Yeah, definitely. So I think embodied carbon is a really interesting case study. You said it's a relatively new term. Obviously, it depends a little bit on kind of who you talk to, and the concept of embedded energy, for example, has been in the sustainability lexicon for 50 years. But in the architecture and design practice, I think for sure, you look at something like LEED, which revolutionized the operational efficiency of a huge chunk of our building stock.
Yeah.
But there has not been an equivalent movement that started around that time, in the early 2000s or so, for the supply chain. And so I love, Melissa, what you said about it being kind of surprisingly intuitive. And I think it's probably because it's built on the foundations of the same lessons we learned about energy efficiency in the operations of the built space. We just apply those concepts and those ideas to the supply chain. And it's like, oh yeah, we do want to make that more efficient. We do want to use renewable energy. We do want to think about materials. We do want to think about their life cycle. I want to touch on, I'm going to answer that question, David, and I'm going to do it quickly, but I do want to touch on circularity real quick, because I am of the opinion that the interior design community has been motivated to dig into embodied carbon in a way in the last 5 years that is really remarkable. And at the same time, if we are mostly working and thinking about new construction, it is just empirically true that the bulk materials make a bigger difference. And so it is still the architecture community that feels the onus for leadership on low carbon. The problem with that is that we do at least as much renovation, as you were pointing out, as we do new construction. And if we want to be resilient in many ways in the next few decades, we have got to focus predominantly on renovation and saving core and shell. So the interior designers' awareness of embodied carbon and ability to practice specification and material selection for lower carbon, fit out materials is crucial. I also believe that circularity is the number one way for the interior designer to get involved in low carbon, right? Because indeed there's a huge range of lower carbon options for new products. But when Allison talks about reuse, right, that is pretty close to carbon free compared to the demand for a brand new version of task chair, workstation, piece of flooring, partition, any of it, right? So I think all of that you used the word confluence earlier, David. It's a really brilliant kind of way to integrate these things. And I do think that it is intuitive to think that because the interface story, people come to us thinking, well, we want good sustainability kind of oriented products. We should talk to interface. We appreciate that. The vast majority of our sales have nothing to do with sustainability. And this is a really important point, because I wouldn't have a job if it wasn't a big part of our brand, for sure. But the majority of the business that we do is driven by the same things that drive most product specifications, performance, longevity, availability. Do we like the rep? Is the customer service good? All those things. And in our case, is it pretty? So I think it's been great to see a building momentum to demand not just sustainability information, but actually in some cases more in-depth information, and people following in Melissa's footsteps, being able to know how to pick apart an EPD. That's a really good trend, because we've actually had a lot more transparency in the industry than has been leveraged for the last 10 plus years. And I think that's changing in a good way, meaning people are starting to actually take that data, rely on it to make different decisions, make it clear to the market why they're making those decisions. And that is changing manufacturers' behavior.
And another side of that is designers requesting the data. And one of the things I tell students, and Saty, I bet you do too, is that we designers have power to go to companies who aren't supplying that information and they say, we're not going to buy your product unless you can tell us, unless you can give us that EPD or that HPD. And that can move the market. And I'm glad you brought up a couple of things because in my intro, I didn't want to extend it too long, but there are a couple of other quick important factors in that confluence. One is, because as you mentioned, LEED, there's been a lot of progress made in reduction of operating energy of buildings, which means the onus is coming down to more the embodied upfront, whatever description we want to use. And that ties in nicely with the fact that in the environmental place we are in right now, while lowering energy demand over time is terrific, we need to lower it right now. And that's what embodied energy does. That's the energy that's going to be expended right now to build your project, as opposed to what's going to be utilized over the next 20 or 30 years. So that brings even more emphasis onto it.
Yeah. Can I jump in and share a little bit more about LEED, for example? So something I didn't include in my intro is that for the last 5 years, I was on the MRTAG and the chair of the MRTAG for a couple of years, which is the Materials and Resources Technical Advisory Group for USGC. So we write and maintain the materials and resources category. And anyway, over the last year, we published the 2 public comments for LEED version 5, and it will be released this year. Now that I'm no longer on the tag, I don't have the inside scoop exactly on when that is, but I understand, and what I had heard before was probably in Q2. But what I want to mention here is that LEED is recognizing the importance of embodied carbon on all project types. And so within the rating system that's been published for LEED version 5, for new construction, for core and shell, for interiors projects, they require some analysis about embodied carbon of that project. The scope of that kind of changes depending on each of those project types, but some level of analysis and comparing that to sort of industry baselines. It's not requiring reductions at that prerequisite level, but there's credits and opportunities to earn points if you can demonstrate those reductions. So I think that will help drive us more forward faster, right? Because the first step is for teams to understand, like, where do you sit, right? What is the embodied carbon of the space and of the materials that we're using, so that they can start to make informed decisions. And if they're not doing that already, and many firms are doing that, or at least on select projects, but needing to do it kind of across the board on all projects that are pursuing a certification like LEED is really important. So
yeah, big step. And visibility is a huge first factor. So yeah, I didn't mean to say LEED hasn't done a good job, Allison. I appreciate you bringing that up because it has opened that chapter.
It's been a movement in it.
Yeah, no, I didn't hear you say that it hadn't done a good job. So don't worry.
And Living Building Challenge has a very similar emphasis on reuse of building or parts of buildings at the same time. So we're seeing a lot of attention put onto that. Did anyone else want to jump in on the topic, or should I pose the next question? Okay. Well, early on, it was mentioned how we talk to our clients about it, about just being more sustainable in our designs and our projects. And I sometimes tell a quick story, promise it's quick, about 20 years ago or so, talking to a potential new client who came to me not for sustainability. And I said to her, if we can, do the design to the style and the budget and the programming that you are asking for, do you have any problem with using sustainability practices and materials? And of course, I phrased the question in a way where you couldn't say no. But she said to me, mostly joking, but not entirely, well, we don't have any children, so we don't care. And it's just an interesting, sarcastic take on it. And I think that kind of response wouldn't happen as much anymore. But my question basically, it was a long-winded way of getting into it. How do you need to sell sustainability to your clients? And if so, how do you do it?
Can I say?
Mhm.
So I think I see this as a big opportunity for all designers. They can understand what clients want ultimately, and clients want probably modern, trendy, beautiful designs, and something that's budget friendly, that's easy to upgrade. So this is a big opportunity for designers to understand those requirements and use their creative approach to deliver these elegant, sustainable solutions that are durable, affordable, and probably also meeting the sustainability requirements, like it's upgradable, and those are elegant designs also. So I think I see this as a constraint, but also an opportunity, in a way that we can convince client that adopting certain practices or a particular design is sustainable and also budget friendly, and could also be durable, long lasting, so it's beneficial for the client. So communicating that, I think the long term value, the benefit to the client, I think that could be something useful that could convince the client. If we show them that examples or case studies of how this has benefited others, and what is the value in sustainable design in long term, what are the long term benefits, long term advantages, then I think they would be ready to adopt. If sometimes companies are not able to, or clients do not have that vision, if we can provide that, show them how this can provide them eco advantage that could take them ahead of their competitors or ahead of the green wave, I think there is this opportunity. They would be willing to adopt this to a certain extent. But yeah, sometimes it's difficult to find a more budget friendly option. So it also requires to research what are the options available, which are sustainable, budget friendly, and then elegant designs, I think. So yeah, so there are some challenges also, but I think this showing long term benefits could be one way to convince.
And thankfully, I think we're past the point where we have to convince people that sustainability can be elegant. We're past that burlap stage. But other experiences with having to convince clients?
Yeah, I mean, I work with a lot of different clients, and they're, but I'm also working on projects that have some sort of sustainability goals in general. So that's already a level of self-selection. But some of those clients, they just know that they need to get a certification level. Maybe that's driven by where they're developing, what the market is asking, what the financing for their project is requiring. There's a lot of different reasons why that might be the case, that they have an interest in sustainability. It may not be simply because it's the right thing to do, right? For some of us, that's all we need. And so, trying to get at what is most important to them and understanding what's most important to them, and really speaking to them in that language. So you can look online and see what a particular client potentially, what their goals and values are, and sort of tie it back to the sustainability mission, whether it's that they're about reducing carbon, right? And so maybe that's kind of your in. I also work with a lot of healthcare clients, so talking to them about the health of materials is something that's really a good driver, and they understand the value in that, and so that's really your in to have some of these conversations. But ultimately, I think it is the right thing to do, and you don't have to justify that you selected a particular material just because it's sustainable. There's a lot of other reasons that you might suggest this material to a client, and that's fine. And just also make sure it's sustainable at the same time.
Terrific. Yeah, I'm glad you brought in the health aspect, because I find that a major selling point also.
Yeah.
A little bit of self-interest. Want to talk about materials for a couple of minutes because that's where the embodied carbon discussion begins. And there's been a lot of research and development and new and interesting materials that probably many designers haven't come across. Are there any materials that you guys are seeing that you find particularly exciting or just beautiful to work with? Sustainable materials, of course. What have you been playing with, and what do you see on the horizon?
I can talk about some of these. So what I'm seeing is that there are a lot of developments that are happening in material sector, sustainable material sector. There is obviously more focus on its kind of interest that's growing towards eco-friendly, renewable materials. And also, I'm seeing that more and more materials are emerging, for instance, in bioplastic category, biopolymers category, materials that are made from renewable resources. So those are there, that development is happening. Then I'm also seeing changes, advancements in 3D printing industry, where 3D printing is showing us, is giving us entirely new way of manufacturing processing. So what new material developers are doing is, when they're creating new materials, different biopolymers or different kind of plant-based materials or renewable resources based materials or materials made from waste, they're trying to see if that works with 3D printing. So I'm thinking there would be more options available easily for 3D printing, which are more sustainable. So I've seen cellulose-based printing, cellulose-based materials being used in 3D printing. Food and agricultural waste materials are used in 3D printing. So there's a lot of experimentation happening in that field. So I think there is advancement in this area, and biopolymer and other biomaterials and renewable materials as well.
I think we have to be a little bit careful in talking about 3D printing because yes, 3D printing is inherently more efficient with materials because you're building up instead of tearing down. But it's equally possible to 3D print with a non-environmental material. So we have to be conscious of what it is we're 3D printing with. And 3D concrete printing is a big example of that. People are talking about building houses out of 3D concrete, but it's still concrete. Which has a big embodied energy issue, as we all know. So I think what's exciting that I see is the confluence of those new materials you're talking about with 3D printing. And I'm hearing a lot about materials made of mycelium and algae. What do you see coming? Has anybody been playing with those?
Yeah, sure. We have. I mean, there's certain level of like bioplastic kind of family of bioplastics. And by the way, I apologize if I got cut off on my internet dropped for a minute there. That interface is experimented with in the past. And actually it kind of brings me to an interesting point, which is related to materials, but is also related to kind of how we define a more sustainable or a better material. We need to align I said this to Saty before, so sorry you've heard this, but we need to align our expectation for the use of a product and material to the longevity of the material we're going to use. 3D printing is a great example, David. If we 3D print plastic toys to be used by a 2-year-old for maybe 6 months of pure joy, and that plastic doesn't break down for 700 years, it doesn't really matter that we didn't waste much material in the manufacturing of that toy, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
In the commercial space, we expect, and Allison and Melissa will, I think, back me up 1,000%. We expect that all of the products that we spec for projects and for our owners have long warranties, are designed to last and be super durable and stand up to a lot of abuse. And then when the lease runs out, we trash it. And guess what? They continue to stand up to a ton of abuse in the landfill. So as we experiment with materials, we also need to adjust what we consider to be sort of the end goal. And so I think that there is a whole world of possibility out there for compostable, biodegradable materials, especially if we don't have to treat them to get them to biodegrade, which is a really tricky kind of mechanism because you still have to do the product take back, which is basically where it mostly fails anyway. Or we need to readjust how we value products for their longevity. So I think a lot about office furniture and the reality that all of it is going to stay in great shape and be reusable, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years, like easily. And it gets trashed after 3 to 5 most of the time. That's the case for our product, and it is certainly the case for furniture, right? So I see Allison wants to jump in, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, because I think it is a combination of like changing our expectations based on a material palette that we think hits different goals, but also changing our systems of the hard part. One of my favorite one-liners from my colleague Mikhail Davis is the hard part about circular economy is mostly the economy part. Circularity is actually relatively technically easy to solve, and we have in many cases. It is almost never economical, and that's why it doesn't happen, right? Economical by our current kind of standards, by all the externalities that we have baked into the system and all that stuff. That's some of the underlying assumptions that need to change.
Yeah, I was at a talk on this concept, of course, and somebody told a story of a downtown Manhattan firm that was moving somewhere else into New York City, large office, and they found it was cheaper for them to throw out their office chairs and buy new ones, even though they were in good shape.
That happens all the time.
And to move them just to their new office, which is obviously ridiculous.
Ridiculous, right? Yeah. A few years ago, we did a bunch of internal research, just trying to analyze for commercial interior spaces. What has the biggest impact when we're looking at embodied carbon? And, each project, came back with some different results, but in general, across the board, the biggest impact was furniture. And furniture is super easy to reuse. Yes, you might need to move it and transport it to another place, right? But as a product, it is intact, kind of full use, and you can move it to another location. Maybe it goes, maybe it's something that you can reconfigure within your space. But that, I think also just across any sort of project type, whether it's residential or commercial interiors or healthcare or retail, that there's opportunities for reuse there. That's super easy. And then if it does fail in 5 to 10 years or sooner, you can replace it easily. And it's not like if another material failed and having to replace it at that point in time. So I think it's a big opportunity for everybody, kind of no matter where you're working. But in our own offices, this is a conversation that we've had. And anyway, there's some resistance as well, I think, because fear about warranties, or how are they going to replace that in 5 years if it does fail. And so there's, I think, just some resistance there that should be easy to overcome. But I do acknowledge that it's not as easy as maybe I'm making it sound.
Yeah, trying to find furniture that's designed for repair and designed for disassembly later on. That's another aspect we have to get more fluent in.
Yeah.
I do want to leave some room for audience questions. Just before that, I want to ask you all, it's kind of a tough time to be an environmentalist right now. A lot going on in the world that is of concern, perhaps. But what motivates you and what keeps you excited about the prospect of what we can be doing, and why do you do it? What's behind all this for you? A very general question.
I mean, for me, it's I guess just how I grew up and the thought that I grew up with. I remember as a child at school, we started learning about recycling and getting super excited about recycling and collecting all the milk boxes to be recycled at school and sort of that level of activism. But, it's continued on throughout my life. And in graduate school, I was asked to make our materials library more sustainable. And that is kind of my first real, I think, dive into sustainable materials and trying to figure that out. And so it's just it's the perspective that I was taught to take to approach design with and also to approach life. But I'm also, I think, eternally optimistic. So
That's sort of a truism that to be a designer, you have to be an optimist, right?
Yeah.
Other thoughts? Saty?
I think what keeps me motivated is understanding and knowing that we are going through this transition phase, and transition phases are slower and difficult, but it whenever we change, we go through that transition phase always. So so sustainability is relatively new. Everyone is understanding, and people have different opinions. So it takes time for industries also to change, for clients to understand, for everyone, for designers also to practice. So it is going to take some more time, but soon, very soon, everyone will be on the same page, and this will be on topmost priority. So that keeps me motivated and positive, and seeing, because I'm into teaching, so seeing what students learn and when they practice, and they start questioning, why are we not doing it the right way? And that keeps me motivated.
And you, by the way, earlier brought up behavior change, which I think is fascinating. And I wish we had another half hour to go into that topic of our own behaviors and working with our clients as well, because that should be its own panel probably. But other thoughts on what keeps you going? What excites you? Everybody?
I think for me, actually, Allison, I kind of feel the same way. Like grade school is very foundational in a lot of my values about sustainability, and it's nice to have carried that through. It feels good. But I think also there's a degree to which a lot of our practices and processes for sustainability are about exploration and discovery at its core. It's a really interesting way that you can start to think about your work and think about what you're doing, think about your impact and your place in the world. And I think that is incredibly powerful. And whether it comes out in embodied carbon or circularity or, operational energy, whatever it might be, I think that is fundamentally valuable and makes you a better designer. And I hope that everyone continues to think about that.
Yeah, I'll go quick, David. I would say, I mean, I love these answers. For me, it doesn't feel like a choice. I think I'm sort of married to this, and it's just not going to go away for me. I wouldn't be satisfied if I weren't trying. But I think one of the things that's really important is for me to remember is it, especially at these times when things feel really hard or really dark or kind of cynical or kind of hopeless. The reality is that the solutions are inspiring and we don't really know what they look like and we don't really know what they feel like yet. And so there's a better way. We have reinvented, we have redesigned, we have improved the industry and our practices and our processes kind of infinite times. It's actually constantly evolving, right? And not all progress is linear. I'm not trying to say that, but there is no downside to our sensitivities in these areas being, turned on. And I like to remind myself to say, like, hey, no matter what pushback you're feeling from others or from the kind of culture in general, like, why not do this? What's the downside of lower carbon, more efficient, more equitable, safer products? What if we're wrong about it all? Well, guess what? Then we're better off still, and that's what I think is really important to hold on to. And it does take a redesign process. It does take a different way to do design thinking to get there.
Yeah, and I agree with you wholeheartedly that that's a little bit of what's behind when I'm writing my eco-optimism topics, that it's a win-win and sometimes win-win-win situation. So what's the problem? Well, we're at 3:51-ish, and I do want to leave some time for some questions that have been posted. And I think people know if you do have a question, post it in the Q&A. And there's some good ones in here, some very good ones. I think the one I'd like to start with for everybody is being asked, are there opportunities to expand interior design services to include guidance to clients on end-of-use processes for furniture and materials? And that, when I was talking about changing mindsets in the interior design profession, I think that's one of the major ones, is planning for the end part of your project. And I think this person maybe is asking, is a positive part of that being additional services to provide and be paid for? So how do we modify our range of services as well as our thinking to incorporate that end of life for what we're designing with. Thoughts on that?
Allison?
Yeah,
You
well,
want
I
me to
mean,
answer?
I mean, there are opportunities for that, but there's also, I think, when you're reusing furniture, there's opportunity. It will take you more time to coordinate that as an interior designer, right? So there is opportunity for increased fee there. The client will save money on the furniture itself because they're reusing it, and overall there should be a net savings. But you know, there is definitely opportunity for more services there. And in my work, I mean, we're always trying to push, I think, that boundary of services, especially around sustainable materials. And I do some very specific kind of analysis and work with certain clients on that front, which I won't have time to go into now, but there is, I think there's ample opportunity.
Yeah, there's growing demand. It's almost a growing field, I think. But I will say, kind of just like reuse is not a new idea. What's old is new again on process here too. You talk to somebody who was deep in the throes of interior design in the late 80s through the 90s, early 2000s, there was a lot of fee hours being spent on just reformatting space and moving around existing pallets of workstations and or task chairs and whatever. Because we have made the process of throwing everything out and getting new stuff so efficient, that is a practice that doesn't really exist nearly in the same way as it used to. And there's not a great reason for that. Like that's not really a good outcome for anybody except for like maybe OEMs. So we've got to think about how to flex that design muscle as a differentiator in creative ways without it only being brand new stuff in the door whenever you have a deadline for us.
And I sometimes use a phrase many have used, that we have to view our materials as not things that we just grab and place and forget about, but that all our materials are really just borrowed from the earth, and we have to think about them as a circular system, because we've been talking about circularity. How do those materials go back? What happens to them when we're finished with our borrowing of them for our projects? And I think most of us don't have that mindset yet. As designers, it's still finish the project and you're done, and not seeing that full range. So and I hadn't thought about it, as the questioner asked, in terms of an additional source of fees as well, which is kind of interesting.
I think one thing that just to add to this, one thing that's missing in our approach is life cycle thinking about the entire life cycle during the design phase, thinking about what would happen at the end of life, including whatever happens, how do we bring it back to the cycle. So thinking at the early stage of the design process about all these things, all phases of the life cycle, and then making an informed decision about choices, about processes, materials, I think that can make a big difference.
Terrific. I'm looking at our other questions, and someone is asking, how do we foresee the process of dissecting EPDs and HPDs and all the similar declarations out there being streamlined and simplified? And this is especially of interest to me, actually, also incorporated into design education to equip future professionals with the tools to make our data-driven decisions. And I am actually very, very curious what you all think of this, because I'm a little bit overwhelmed by the flood of software and certifications and data, and figuring out what are the routes to include in education, but more importantly for this, what are the things that designers need to know in order to simplify this big process, potentially big process?
Yeah, I mean, there are tools out there that are in development or are available to start to do some of this work. Speaking of EPDs, there's tools like EC3, and that's specific to certain material categories, right? So it's not every material category, but you can start to use that to compare the embodied carbon of, for example, one carpet against other carpets, right? Is it lower in embodied carbon than just kind of in general across carpets, and start to have that level of analysis. In regards to HPDs, health product declaration, I'm also maybe also confess that I'm the chair of the HPDC technical committee, so I'm deeply involved in that organization as well. But HPDs has a tool now called the Material Health Suite, and that you can access, and it will start to it allows for kind of filtering and seeing if different HPDs have certain material classes in them. And so you can start to use that to more quickly understand and identify if it's free of a particular material class. So if you want to find products that are free of PFAS or free of halogenated flame retardants or some other kind of chemical class, that's a tool that's available as well. But there's a number of other things that are in development, or that I think it's a problem that we're all trying to solve and trying to figure out how we can scale. There's the data that's available like HPDs and EPDs, but how can we scale that information kind of on a project level and across a firm as well? And that's a bit of the challenge right now.
And just in case people missed it, that tool is Material Health what?
Tool Suite.
Tool Suite.
Yeah.
Terrific. And yet another one that I haven't heard of, and I'm trying to keep track of all these.
Yeah.
So fundamentally, David, it's a really hard problem. There are increasing sources of data and increasing demand for different types of data, actually.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think, to me, the hopeful elements here are the common materials framework as just a sort of language that firms can agree to use to put pressure on manufacturers. Melissa has been, I think, really heavily involved in the Gensler product sustainability standard, which is, in my opinion, the best and a really important step in terms of implementing material evaluation consistent with the CMF. And it matters that it's Gensler. It matters that they're the biggest firm in the world. It matters that it's so comprehensive, even though they have a long way to go, as I'm sure Melissa is unfortunately involved in developing out the plan for different product categories and all that kind of thing. And rolling it out globally is really complicated too. But kudos to them for kind of establishing that. Because I think we don't have the database or the tool that coalesces, and it's been tried for years and it has not been successful yet, that coalesces all of the sustainability related data points that are relevant for products, makes it searchable, makes it consistent, keeps things up to date. That just doesn't exist. There are a bunch of databases that have tried, but nobody has really been successful. So if somebody can crack that code, awesome. But in the meantime, I would think of EC3 as an example of a metric specific tool that is more successful doing a smaller job than the sort of one source of truth database, which nobody has really solved yet. So I think in the near term, trying to find and have a relationship with specific tools that do a good job to help you kind of meet or understand sustainability impact in one area is a safer bet.
Yeah, I've been actually surveying firms for my program update to find out what tools they look for their new hires to be fluent in. And EC3 comes up often, as does an LCA program, one-click LCA, as just the fundamental tools for designers to have a handle on. We're actually, there's so many things I want to continue asking, by the way, even on this topic and ones on my list that we didn't get to. Maybe we can schedule another hour because I think this has been terrific, but we are at the end of our allotted slot. I don't have any prepared conclusions to this. I want to leave as much time for us all to speak, but I do find this so exciting because of things like these new tools that are coming out, this new emphasis and understanding within the profession, and the new ways in which we can start to think about design without changing what design aesthetically is or performatively is, but that we can expand our roles and our mindsets in this with the understanding that the things we're placing on the earth have an impact, and that they have a relatively short lifespan. And much as we like to do our designs and think of them as our expressions, our mark on the planet or what have you, in reality, they're temporal, they're passing. and we have to take responsibility for that aspect of it as well. Does anybody want to add any? Those are my semi maybe profound thoughts. Anybody have any closing thoughts on it? Okay, well, thank you all so much. I love speaking with you and discussing these topics, and I hope we can continue.